All right. So welcome everyone to our first AgileSherpas LinkedIn Live on Agile ways of working and living. My name is Monica Georgieff. I'm a senior Agile coach at AgileSherpas and our host for this very first foray into using LinkedIn as a channel to bring together some Agilists from our network, our wider network, to share their experience of different aspects of agility. And this first topic that we chose to focus on was born from a LinkedIn post about how I was using Agile to organize my wedding, which seemed like this really huge, impossible undertaking when I first heard about it. But by using Agile practices and values and principles, it really became something totally doable and exciting in the process. So our panelists today commented on the post about how they were using Agile in their daily lives outside of just their professional pursuits, which are also indirectly and directly linked to agility. So we decided to sort of bring them together to tell us a little bit more about how they're using Agile in their day-to-day at home. So we have Pam Ashby. Welcome, Pam. Melissa Reeve and Pedro Cordero together today. So thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to start by having our panelists just introduce themselves briefly, tell us where they are in the world, because they are all in different areas of the world right now, and tell us how they first got into Agile through professional pursuits or through personal lives. So we'll jump into some questions after that about how their experience has been applying it personally and professionally. But I'd like to introduce our panelists. I think they'll do a better job of it than me. So I'd like to go to Melissa first, and then we'll go around and meet everybody. So
Great,
Melissa,
thanks, Monica. It's such a pleasure to be here. And it's a little bit of a strange experience because normally I'm used to seeing all the faces. So that's what's different, to just know that we can't see you. So I first started using Agile in 2013, and it was Agile marketing. And I was really struggling with some campaigns at that time. We were doing these lockstep campaigns, planning things out 6 months in advance, and the market was moving too quickly. So I did some Googling, and Dr. Google directed me towards this thing called Agile. I found a white paper around Agile marketing and started to implement it. Lo and behold, in 2016, I came across a company called Scaled Agile. And if you've ever heard of the Scaled Agile framework, they are the providers of the Scaled Agile framework. And I had been with them for the past 6 years before leaving in February to start the Agile Marketing Alliance. So now half my time is with the Agile Marketing Alliance and half my time is doing some consulting.
Pam, over to you.
Thanks, Monica. Lovely to be here. It's great to be part of this discussion. Hard to be agile with it only touching your professional life. So for me, I was working as a marketer, as a marketing consultant in the project management area. And at that time, Agile PM, a sort of full life cycle Agile framework from the Agile Business Consortium, where I'm working right now, was launched. And when Agile PM was launched, I did kind of look at it as well as market it and thought, this is really great. And then I went and did the qualification. And I tell you, I sat through that whole thing thinking, this is what marketers need. Bear in mind, Agile PM was the only Agile I knew at that time. So that's what it meant to me. And from then on, I've been evangelizing Agile in marketing. And that's become my whole being. So I coach, I consult, I train, and that's really what I do. I want to bring Agile to the marketing population.
Cool. I sense a trend forming. Pedro, what about you?
Thanks, Monica, and thanks for inviting me here today. For me, it started professionally. I took an Agile course with AgileSherpas with you a few years ago in my time at HSBC. And at the time, the bank was making huge efforts to embrace Agile, and our marketing leadership was really on board. I was part of that marketing team. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity they gave me to learn about Agile and start piloting it on a few projects.
Nice. And as I mentioned, you all are in different areas of the world. Pedro, you're in Madrid, but you're calling from Romania right now. Pam, where are you based?
I'm in Kent in southern UK.
And Melissa, I don't know if you mentioned it.
I'm in Boulder, Colorado, which is just outside of Denver, Colorado in the US.
So Agile is global, personally and professionally. Interesting to see that. I know that all of you have different angles through which you've sort of approached agility in your personal lives. I'm curious to hear about what was the catalyst for bringing Agile outside of the professional context where you first encountered it and bringing it into your personal life? Because it seems like all of you came to agility through professional pursuits, right? So let's start with Pam. What was the catalyst for bringing Agile into your personal life, Pam?
I don't think I really thought about it as a sort of, this is a seminal moment. But once you start thinking about let's do just enough to get the value that's needed right now, then you apply that to everything. So, for instance, one story I like to tell is about my husband. Okay, so this is a secret for all of us. And there was an apple tree. It was cut down in our garden. So there's significant bit of trunk left. And I said, you know what? I'd really like a bird table. Couldn't you sort of use that bit of trunk for a bird table? And he said, no, that wouldn't do. Because you know what? I'd have to find some wood and then I'd have to put some edging on the wood and make it look beautiful. And you'd never get it level. And I could see this was all about his using his skill from his perspective to get the perfect bird table. So I'm like, well, can't you just get a bit of hardwood and just ram it on the top and it'll be fine. The birds will love it. And he really resisted. But for me, this was the Agile way. The value I needed was something to put bread on. And he was full of, well, it'll roll off and it won't be good. But I did get my way and he did it and the birds love it and we enjoy them every day. But for me, that was an Agile approach. Minimum effort for maximum value and really focusing on what was needed.
Awesome. Melissa, what about you? How did you bring Agile into your personal life, having encountered it professionally?
So it was an interesting situation because my husband, another husband story, is a computer scientist, and so he is just facing everything that Agile is meant to solve, and yet he wasn't working in Agile environments. He was overloaded, bosses expecting too much, too little time, and so I just saw the pain that was wreaking havoc in his life. And here I was learning these Agile ways and implementing them. And it kind of came to a head, in both a teaching moment and a collaborative moment, when over the honey-do list. So, oftentimes this happens where you've got a long list of things for your husband to accomplish. And my husband is a people pleaser. So we would get up on the weekend and he'd be like, Melissa, I can mow the lawn. I can build you some shelving. I can put gas in your car. I can do the grocery shoppings. And we'd get to the end of the day and he would have mowed the lawn. And there was some communication errors in terms of what the priorities were. And there were some communication misunderstandings around scope. And so when we did a joint Kanban board together and we were able to actually visualize the work and we were able to actually assign story points, and people sometimes look at me sideways at this point and they're like, well, that doesn't sound very romantic. Well, guess what? Having little arguments all the time is also not very romantic. So visualizing the work was key, establishing the Kanban, agreeing on scope, much like Pam's story, where you're trying to get what's the minimum viable agreed upon outcome here, was really critical in getting that alignment so that expectations were met and we didn't hit the end of the day feeling like we didn't get done accomplished and we didn't have shared goals. So this really caused alignment in our marriage.
Yeah, in your comment, Melissa, under the post about me planning my wedding was like, Agile saved my marriage. That never happens with my wife from Sam. But yeah, that was, I knew that there was a story there, and it's very overarching, right? It's not one situation, it's alignment throughout the marriage, which is so valuable. Right?
Absolutely.
Pedro, what about you? How did you bring Agile from your professional life into your personal life?
For us, I think it was when being an expat in the Middle East. So I worked in HSBC in Dubai with an regional role, and then we decided to move back to Europe, where I'm based now. And that meant there was a lot of adjustment. If you've been an expat, you know what it is, right, to move across countries. You suddenly find yourself doing a lot of to-do lists on, the school for the kids, paperwork. We also moved into a new house, and all that involved. So I think Agile was, a way to avoiding falling into complete chaos with so many things to do in our personal life. We had to prioritize and streamline how we manage things in the house. So it was mostly for household chores for us, and it really helped us to overcome the adjustment of moving into a new country with a family.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned also that working remotely, right, is something relatively new because of the pandemic, not just for you, but for many of us. Did Agile help with that at all?
Definitely. So we both, my partner and I, moved back to Europe in remote jobs, full remote jobs. So we found ourselves with that challenge as well. It comes with a lot of flexibility and advantages, but you also have to learn to to manage the space at home, and also ensure that you get more tasks usually at home, and again, you have to learn to prioritize and ensure that it can be a space where everyone can live comfortably and happily.
Yeah, absolutely. I felt the same way when my partner asked me to marry him. I was like, oh no, I don't have time for that. I don't have space in my backlog for that. Being an Agile coach and trainer, of course, I was thinking now, like, how can we break this down into actual, actionable pieces that we could divvy up and manage expectations so that it can actually happen within, right, a couple of years, because it was at risk of just constantly being delayed and falling off of our to-do list. So we actually started doing like retros on Sunday nights. We did a planning meeting on Monday morning. I mean, it's us having our coffee, right? So it's not as official. It's more casual, but still the goals are the same, right? And we did some backlog refinement as well, thinking about those big chunks and how to break them down into what actually needs to happen. We had ownership over that. We even had a WIP limit because depending on the given week, I mean, sometimes we were super busy and weren't able to take on as much as a different week in time. So we did use specific practices to break down this huge endeavor and make it something real. And the wedding hasn't happened yet, so it's in about a month. But everyone's asking me if I'm super stressed because it's coming up, and I am not. Right, most of the work is actually done. We pulled it through the process pretty quickly. And everyone is working on that board, all of our vendors, and we brought them all into this. So I'm spreading the word. But I'm wondering, we heard a little bit of this from Melissa about the actual Agile practices that you pulled into your personal lives. So Pam, I don't know if you mentioned any practices, but I'd be really curious to hear which practices were the ones that really had the most impact in your situation.
So I really have to stress here, just in case there are a whole load of people watching and listening to us right now that think there's no way I can be a dedicated Agilist because I don't have a Kanban board in the house. So I would not get away with that. Trello is banned in my house. My husband would not have it. And I did ask him if I could say that. So that really isn't happening. I have to be a bit more subtle, but it's still there, because it is really about planning in detail for now and not worrying about too far ahead. So really working out constantly what matters now and only thinking about that. And I spot this in conversations within family quite often, that maybe somebody's thinking about, oh, but I'm worried about this because I don't have the detail. That doesn't matter right now. What matters now? So it's that comes in. It's really that avoiding distraction. So I think an agile approach prevents us from being distracted. And that can come in the smallest ways. How come it takes us longer to do our housework than it does if we employ a cleaner? Well, that's because we're distracted, whereas they're really focused on what needs to be done and they're not distracted by the tidying up or any other things. And having that focus on the job that needs to get done is really valuable in any setting. So I think that's one of the really important things, that sort of focusing on the value, that outcomes, not outputs, and really getting that point of just enough, not going for perfectionism.
So also not multitasking and context switching. I think I'm hearing you say that might be sort of an important aspect of it. I know that multitasking used to be sort of this badge of honor, like people would put it on their CVs where, I'm a multitasker, hire me instead of someone else who's not. But it turns out that, our brains don't actually work that way. And I think Agile is not the only methodology that's brought that to light, I don't think, but it is one of the methodologies that sort of, I guess, summarizes that and shows many examples of all of the negative components of multitasking and what it can result in, right? Not being able to deliver value, not being able to deliver on an outcome that you wanted. So I love that you're bringing it up.
I think that's right. I think the neuroscience point is important because our brains haven't evolved as fast as our environment. And we actually can't do everything at once. So to give ourselves half a chance of stopping, starting, finishing, and doing it to quality, we really do have to focus and limit our work in progress in any environment.
Yeah, definitely. What are some other techniques? Maybe Pedro, you didn't mention any that I heard, specific techniques from Agile that you implemented. Did you have a board?
We do have the board because essentially we started to note down all of these tasks and group them into projects, and also we involved our little one. So we have 2 kids, and the older one is the smaller one is too small, but the older one is 4, and she, we're trying also to help her take ownership of the tasks. She can't write yet, but we note for her on the board, and it works. She usually comes to tell us that she has completed a task, so we can check it off for her, and we also reward her for completing goals consistently. For example, to watch an episode of her favorite show. And then we run up which I guess it's a typical application of Agile, which is the stand-up meeting. We run it in the morning, which is that moment when we are having breakfast as a family, and we usually talk about what is working, what is not, what resources we need to get the tasks done. And then at the end of the week, we evaluate what went well and what needs changing. And that has helped us understand and record how we can do things better next time. It has been also useful to understand in terms of planning, what is a higher difficulty task or project, what maybe was unnecessary, and we could have condensed in less tasks. We also decide what issues need addressing in the next week, and everyone can make suggestions, but we do set limits. So we just have 2 or 3 issues to get the focus on that given week, and that has been really, good in terms of productivity at home. I mean, when you have too many things on your plate, it's really hard to focus and get things out of the way in a productive way. So it has been incredibly useful.
Nice. Melissa, did you have some more techniques you wanted to share as well?
I did. There's one that exists in SAFe, and I forget if it exists in Agile too, but it's assume variability and preserve options. And it's this notion that you're not going to have all the information up front. So the story I have, it's been a very dramatic week at my house because the house next door to us has been knocked down. And it's I don't know, I was amazed at how shocking it felt to see like this giant claw come in and just like tear a house that's been standing there for 70 years, which in the US is a long time. Just it was gone in like 3 hours. And in the impact to us is they're going to build in place of this little one-story ranch, kind of this behemoth 5,000 square foot. I don't know what that is in meters. I apologize, but a big house, an underground 4-car garage. The impact to us is that it takes away a lot of our view of the mountains. And yet it's really difficult for us to understand exactly which part of the mountain view is going to go away because the house isn't built yet. Much like the marketing campaign hasn't launched yet, or much like the software hasn't developed yet. And so we're trying to decide, should we move? Should we not move? Are we going to like having this house in our neighborhood? And we're actually, we're having the new owners over for cocktails tonight because we're hoping to get more information to help us make these decisions. And so rather than upfront trying to make a decision of, oh, it's going to be terrible and let's move and be reactive, or waiting until it's too late. And, now, it's clear that the view is really impacted and maybe our house value goes down or something like that. We're trying to just take it incrementally and really understand what the impacts are using the best information we have at the time, and knowing we'll get more and more certain as we go along. And of course, unknowns can be very, very uncomfortable. Like we would love to have all the information up front, but in life, as in work, that isn't always possible.
Yeah, and I really like that you're bringing that up because Agile techniques, like the practices we mentioned, story points, visual boards, that's just one aspect of it. And it's more of the day-to-day aspect of it. But the mindset that you're tapping into here, being comfortable with variability, getting all the information that you can get access to at a given point in time, and then not rushing to be reactive if there's no need to be that way. I think that's tapping into something a little bit bigger than just the practices that we might use, which is a good segue, I think, into my next question for the group overall, what an Agile approach to life really looks like. Because it's not just about the specific scenarios where we've applied the Agile practices. It's about approaching life more generally with an Agile mindset. And I think that openness to variability is one aspect of it, but there are other angles, right, that we might consider if we're approaching life in a more Agile way. So I'm curious, what does an Agile approach to life look like for you? Pam, I saw you unmute there. Perhaps you'd like to start.
Yeah, I unmuted Monica because I was thinking that really when you have that mindset, that leads to your use of the practices. So for instance, in our house, we use Moscow prioritization a fair bit. So that sort of, looking at things and prioritizing it according to what must you have, what should you have, what could you have, and what will you not have this time. And I do think that this time is important because it's not that we're writing it off forever. And we actually used that when we were house hunting a while ago, that we were looking at properties and thinking, well, actually, this house looks really good, but it could do with a lot of work. What would that cost us if we went for this house? So we're kind of mapping it out, and we were looking at what different things, what had to be done. So what must we do, as in we wouldn't be able to buy the house if that wasn't done. What should we do, and so on. So I think that when you've got an Agile approach, you can't help but pull these techniques in as you need them, and you don't always notice.
Yeah, you mentioned prioritization, which I think is absolutely key, especially when you're among your family or a team, professionally or personally, it doesn't matter. When you've got other people involved, being able to prioritize as a group or as a team is really essential. We actually use the Eisenhower matrix, which was used by President Eisenhower when he was a general, I believe. And it was really helpful at the moment in time when we reached our budget for the wedding. And it was like, we had only gone through like half of the things. I was like, okay, we're either going to go way beyond, which we didn't want to do, or we're going to have to cut back on some of the things that were sort of our first go-tos. And for me, the first thing that sort of went to the delete quadrant was this amazing like orchestra. That was the first thing I booked, but I was like, but we don't have chairs, right? So I had to go back and sort of reevaluate. So we've been using the Eisenhower matrix to decide what we can delegate to friends of ours that might do it, just for fun, what we might have to do away with, which is a nice to have, and what we absolutely need to do first because the clock is ticking, versus what might come later. So different techniques for prioritization, but as long as you have that lens in mind that you do need to sort of reshuffle the priorities once in a while in alignment with what's going on around you and the people that are your stakeholders or influencers in some way is key, I think. Pedro, what about you? What does it look like to have an agile mindset to everything in life?
I think for me, it's really the permanent state of adaptation and making improvements. So, as our schedules, our needs, and the family grows, for example, we have to adapt. And just because my partner did the cooking for the last 3 months doesn't mean she will do it forever. We try to stay flexible. And in this way, we build a system that responds to change rather than a set plan that does not adapt new information.
Yeah, I hear that. Any other comments from the group? Melissa, I saw you on mute there.
Yeah, I was just gonna, I think scope management and, yes to everything that Pam said, yes to everything that Pedro said. And scope management feels like a technique, but I think it can also be a mindset in that when we're talking about, for example, this year, we usually have just a huge vegetable garden. I mean, it's like 16-foot rows, and we have massive amounts of vegetables, and we end up donating a lot of it to the food bank because there's just 2 of us. But what we also were faced with this year was a sick dog, and he was getting old. The medicines increased, the amount of attention we had to give this dog increased. And it was this realization, without even really being that formal about it, that this scope was going to be too much for us to take care of this dog and do the garden this year. And so we ended up doing a much, much more scaled back garden. And it was a good thing because the dog really took a lot of our energy. And so in a way, it's allowing me and my husband and those around us to be much more cognizant of our capacity and not just want to say, even if we want to say yes to everything, it's being realistic about the things that we can say yes to and still maintain our sanity.
Yeah, absolutely. Scope management and understanding your capacity is a key one. I wonder though, from the stories that I've heard in the group about maintaining that agile mindset, is it hard sometimes to do that? Because some of this stuff might go against what we're used to doing, right? Maybe we're used to always being the yes man or yes woman, and saying no, for example, can be really tough sometimes. How do you all do it? What is hard about it, and how do you tackle that?
I think that's what an agile mindset really does. It's a bit like constantly decluttering in the house. that you're constantly evaluating the value of every single thing that you do, and you're very intentional with how you use your resources. So I think you tend not to do something because it's been done before, that you realize that resources are finite, and that really you need to look for where the highest value is going to lie. So just that, getting that just enough point all the time to get the value that you need. And that comes with our effort as well.
And going off of, Pam, what you've said, has there been any pushback against that in your life? I mean, we're all Agilists here, so we're like, yeah, makes sense to me. But I'm sure that from outside forces, sometimes it can be tough to put a limit on the number of things you're doing at a time, because someone feels left out, or they feel like they, you know, they're not getting into your scope.
I like to think that Agilists are quite good collaborators. We know that there's not one answer, and we know that we need to step into the shoes of our stakeholders and see it from their perspective, right? So I think that those conversations happen naturally, and the pushback therefore is reduced because you collaborate and you work it out.
The reason I asked that, and I'll bring to the question to the wider group in just a moment, but the reason I asked that is because I know that professionally, all the teams that I've worked with as a coach, they always tell me that, you know, that sort of pushback around prioritization and limiting the number of activities happening at once, that's always the most difficult when it comes to their stakeholders, right? We're fine pushing back when we know the priorities, but what about our stakeholders and the expectation management that we have with them? So I think it's fair to bring up that sometimes we'll have those stakeholders in our personal lives as well. Pedro, what's been hard about maintaining the Agile mindset for you and your family?
I'd say it's been hard, but it's also been incredibly helpful to find common grounds when it comes to priorities and what we really need to get done to live by our values. So when you have that, you know, overarching everything you do, and you keep going back to reevaluate what's more important, what is less, and you do it in a clinical way, where you're even quantifying how long things take and what's the price of deprioritizing something that is important for the family. Then it helps, and you know, in finding common grounds and being aligned. Ultimately, it just gives like a better insight. And as long as you have similar life goals and are in agreement with your family, your partner about it, then it really helps to live by those and find common grounds.
Melissa, what about you?
So I think for me, it's not getting attached to the outcomes. So even though we talked about that learning incrementally and things like that, you know, whether it's myself or other people in my life, you know, let's just say that you'd planned a vacation, and all of a sudden somebody's like, well, I don't think I have capacity for that. Yeah, that gets hard, and that would be hard. Hopefully there's a conversation to say, well, can we go on vacation? And then I think it's this blend of the structured and the unstructured time, where, I don't know, for me, there's times where I just don't really want to think Agile. I know that sounds strange, but it's like, how do I create some free, unstructured time? And it can feel, you know, when I want to really get in a creative zone, maybe it's in the middle of a time block that I had scheduled for more structured activity. And how do I accommodate that more free-flowing, unstructured time? Or maybe you get sick, or there's other things like that. And maybe that's more of the more of the techniques than the mindset, because I don't think the mindset ever really goes away. But I think sometimes there's times where I feel like I'm sticking Agile round peg into a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. Sometimes the outcome should be creating that unstructured time or getting healthy because you've been sick for a couple of days or weeks. So for sure, I think there's moments where we don't need Agile in our personal lives. There might not be as many moments for that in professional stuff because that's, you've got your team, you've got your business goals, your customer outcomes, right? The situation there is a much more structured environment, whereas in personal life, we actually probably benefit from not having structure once in a while. It's only when these big endeavors come around, like moving to a different country or planning a big event, right? That's when we can bring a lot of that in. But the mindset, you're right, continues to churn in the background, if you will. Pam, did you want to add to that?
I think what Melissa was describing, it shows being really purpose-driven and being aligned to values, and that's Agile. So I think that being intentional, that you need that time, and knowing what it is that is the goal, that's very Agile to me. So I think that, as you say, the mindset stays, and it's that intentionality and awareness that I think is so key.
Yeah, being deliberate. So that's a good lead into another question I wanted to pose and be sort of not controversial, but sort of play devil's advocate and ask you what Agile can't do in your personal life. Because I think we've gotten to the point where we're like, okay, there are situations and then there are other types of situations where we might not want to apply it. What can't Agile do? Pedro, do you want to start?
Well, I'd say it can't replace those values that govern how you live your life, aligned to your purpose. So you have to define those values based on your beliefs and your life goals. However, Agile can help you to improve your delivery and achieve a sense of realization, as it can help you to organize yourself better to deliver to the priorities and those goals aligned to your values. So it can't replace that definition, but it can help you achieve that sense of realization and more and better delivery, I'd say.
So you're saying it's like a capability you might pull in when you need it, but it doesn't need to be the only factor that influences how you live your life. I tend to agree. Melissa, what's your take on this? What can't Agile do in your personal life?
If I'm having a really bad day and I'm just whatever else is going on, sometimes I can't just be like, story points will fix it. So there's, I think that Agile certainly can help with expectations and alignment and things that could cause a bad day, but it isn't the end all be all answer to everything. And then the other thing that I find I need to do, because Agile at this granular level, the Kanban boards, the task level can be very execution oriented. It's being able to create the time to zoom out as well and look at some broader strokes, remembering to not just keep doing the same things over and over. For example, maybe every Friday night is date night. And I guess that's where the retrospectives come in. But checking in once in a while and just saying, we've been doing that for a long time. Is it really working for us? Is there something else that we want to do? And I think especially in my personal life, the retrospective part, to retrospect on that bigger picture, can sometimes be difficult to weave in.
Yeah, and sometimes people are not as comfortable zooming out, right? And looking at that bigger picture because they're on some sort of track and they don't want to derail almost in that way. So creating an environment where you can have those conversations is really important, I think. Pam, what about you? What are you thinking? What can't Agile do? Is it similar to what Pedro and Melissa said or something totally different?
I think it is similar. And I think that Agile can't decide for you what your values are, but Agile might actually point you in the right direction, that actually working out your purpose is a good thing. So you may go to the effort of finding out what your values are and your purpose by being a bit more agile. Agile won't help you grow directly, but an agile mindset and a growth mindset may start you off on the path of looking for self-development and ways to grow. So it may not solve the fact that human beings are not comfortable with uncertainty, but the expectation of uncertainty comes with being more agile. So it helps a little bit. Those sorts of things, that you become not quite so attached to your own point of view because you know there are others. These are the things that we hope Agile will help with, but we have to do the work. Agile won't solve any of that for us. It just points us in the right direction. And we can't attribute it all to Agile either, because it's not unique. It's just one way, one vocabulary that helps us cope and wrangle these things.
Yeah. I imagine Agile as sort of an additional layer to what we already have going on internally in our moral system, our moral code, if you will. I like that you bring up self-development, because I think when you're talking about your personal life, you're the customer, right? You're not looking outward to, or you shouldn't be, at least from my perspective, always be looking out to please somebody else, right? An external customer that you need feedback from all the time, customer centricity, right? Bringing in that, you're your own customer. So looking internally and being able to figure out what outcome you want or what sort of path you want to take. I don't know if Agile will help you with that, right? It might help you go on that path in a more deliberate and intentional way if that's what you decide. But making that decision for yourself, it comes from probably an even deeper place than all of the Agile values and principles. Totally agree. And I don't know if you guys, panelists, can see the chat over here, but there are a lot of comments from our attendees here talking about really liking the discussion around what Agile can't do. Because I think now that Agile is such a buzzword, everyone's like, let's use Agile for this. Let's do Agile. Let's do it. And now we're talking about it in your personal life on top of everything professionally. So I think it's fair to put it out there that it cannot do everything, right? All right. So that also wonderfully segues into sort of one of my final questions to the group about Agile being such a buzzword now. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what Agile is and what it can and can't do, obviously. What would you say to the skeptics, people who say that Agile is not applicable to your daily life? And it shouldn't be, right? Some might say it's not even applicable to your professional life. So what would you say to those people? You all are Agilists for many years. How do you approach that? Let's start with Pedro. What would you say to the skeptics?
I would recommend them to try it out, see for themselves. And they don't need to adopt everything. Just testing a few techniques could help them a lot in managing their changing priorities, really. It depends also on whether they're thinking of it for a professional or a personal environment, but it can help everywhere. Professionally, you would also get more visibility on the projects and delivery speed as well. So yeah, I would generally recommend to read about it, even start to learn about some of the the mindset aspects of it, and see if they want to start testing some of the techniques, and usually, at least in my experience, that would lead to usually adopting others, testing other things, because they will see the benefits.
So I think what I heard you say is start with the mindset, right? Don't start with the techniques themselves, because they, outside of the context, right, they probably won't be as impactful if we're not doing them with the right intention. And I don't know if I got this right, but are you suggesting that people start with agility professionally and then start to weave it into their personal life if they decide that there's an opportunity to do that, or how would you say?
I wouldn't recommend either way. They can apply it. Obviously, professionally, there is maybe more ease and in depending on the environment, but you have more opportunities to maybe start testing it out. But yeah, I do think that you know, the mindset is more important, and I've worked with a lot of people that just apply a few, you know, some of the principles in their way they work, and it has made a difference for them. So you don't have to absolutely do everything by the book, and you know, a few of these principles can go a long way.
Yeah, and there's also more resources, I think, about applying agility in a professional setting. I think the resources that talk about applying agility in your personal life do not call it agile, right? It's other things, right? It's those same values and principles, but presented in a different way. Pam, what would you say to the skeptics?
I'd say start where you are and don't feel like you have to take on a whole framework or be very purist about it. So as an Agilist, I'm not very purist. I take what I want from different things and create a hybrid. And I think looking back on where I started, the principles of Agile PM are what caught me. So if you're a skeptic, look at something like communicate continuously, clearly and transparently. Well, yeah, clearly that's going to be of use to you. Never compromise quality. Don't demonstrate control, but don't get into hefty reports that nobody wants to read. These things are attractive. So don't be afraid to start where you are. Take what you want. Look at the values and principles of whatever Agile framework you have access to, and just experiment. Start with something and see if it makes a difference.
Would you send them to the manifesto, like the original one built by software developers? Would you send them to any manifesto for that matter?
It really depends who they are and what they're looking for. I would just experiment around Agile generally. You could start by looking at the manifesto. If you're a marketer, then obviously look at the Agile Marketing Manifesto. But look more broadly, be prepared to take what you want from where you find it.
Because I sometimes think that looking at it outside of the context of, you know, Agile, the way that it's been packaged now is coming from the development context in the 2000s. I think that sometimes that can put people off because they think it's, you know, it's for software development. It's only for that specific area, and the language in the original manifesto sometimes refers to products and features, which can sometimes get really distracting when we're trying to look at it as a holistic approach and mindset to a way of work and a way of life. So I think sometimes we can get bogged down in the language. So I don't know. I think I tend to agree with you that whatever works for you is okay, but the manifesto is not the only source where you can look at stuff like that.
But look in a context that meets your needs. So if you're a marketer, then look at Agile marketing resources from specialist Agile marketing companies and start there.
Definitely. Melissa?
So I want to take the point of view from somebody who's skeptical because maybe they've experimented with Agile and have experienced a failed implementation. Now, if you've never been part of an Agile environment, these are also applicable to you because they can be red flags. So the first thing is a failure to invest in change management. And even if I go back to the story of how Agile saved my marriage, nobody likes things imposed on them, not even my husband, it turns out, even though he loves me. So how do you get people on board with this new way of thinking, this new way of working? And, you know, you just have to wait for the pull to a certain extent. You have to wait for people to lean in and start to want to have these types of conversation. You have to have the patience and understand that there is a change curve, and not demand that people, have this mindset immediately hitting the ground running. And that goes to my second point of what I would say to skeptics, which is this isn't a switch that you turn on. This is more like learning tennis. If you think about all the full range of skill levels in tennis, all the way from somebody just newly picking up a racket and trying to figure out how the right grip on the racket, all the way up to somebody who's playing in Wimbledon. And there's just a wide range of skills in between those. It's a pretty big spectrum. And I feel like Agile is like that as well. You can just be getting started and take a few techniques and start to implement them, but it's really a journey. And I anticipate it's a journey that will last me a lifetime. And so when I hear people getting skeptical about Agile, it's either because maybe they have unrealistic expectations. They don't realize it's a journey. They don't realize it's just not something that you can just turn on or off. They focus on the practices, not the mindset. And really doing some self-reflection. If you've done Agile and it's failed, taking a look at those things and seeing what might have happened to your implementation. Or if you're going into Agile and you want to experiment with it, just being mindful that it is a journey, that there are multiple levels, if you will, that it is a mindset, and having patience and enjoying the journey.
Having patience. I like that. So I have one final question for the group, and I'll invite questions in the chat as well. If there's something that our attendees want to hear more about, or a question to a specific panelist or to the group overall, please feel free to chime in with those in the last couple of minutes that we have together. But just based on what I've heard from Pedro, Melissa, and Pam, it sounds like you've been practicing agility in your personal lives with your family members, with your children, with your husbands. Can you be agile in your personal life on your own if you have no support from those sort of external parties, even though they're your partners and your kids? Can you be agile on your own in your personal life? I'll leave the floor open for whoever unmutes first, and that is Pam.
Yeah, I think you can, because clearly my Kanban board has to be a secret in my personal life. So, but it doesn't stop me having one. Agile techniques are really useful for all sorts of things, like organizing Christmas. I mean, that involves other people, but you can do it on your own. Or anything. So I think that working out what's purposeful for you and what is the most effective route to get you there is absolutely relevant for an individual, regardless of the number of stakeholders.
Cool. Melissa?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And a lot of it for me is around language. So I was working with a group of volunteers, and they were arguing, having this battle of opinions. And I started to introduce some experimental language, like, well, what's our hypothesis here? How would we know if we're right or not? And that helped break the logjam. And I didn't have to say anything about the word Agile. So I think even just using the language of Agile that anybody can understand is a way to help those who aren't necessarily practicing Agile introduce it into their context.
Yeah, you don't need to use the jargon, because that can sometimes intimidate people and alienate them. I really like that as an idea. I've been guilty of that several times, using some jargon with my family and my partner. And the first time I suggested we plan the wedding using Agile, it was like, what? What's that? And like, what's WIP limits? And I was like, okay, let's back up, right? Putting a limit on the number of activities we do at the same time makes sense. All right. And bringing more people into it that way. Even though I started on my own, because Agile is the way my mind works, but it wasn't necessarily how our common team mind worked at the time. Pedro, what about you? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I would say that, yeah, your stakeholder is yourself, and you'd have to, it can still help you to have a better focus, right? Because you can, instead of just getting more productivity and just focusing on getting more things done, if you have added a layer of reasoning to that, then it can broaden your perspective, and you can just reevaluate what you're doing regularly, and ensure that you're doing what you want aligned to your purpose. So I can see it also helping on the individual level.
All right, we're just about at time. I see a lot of comments in the chat, but no questions. Everyone seems to be pleased with the way we've covered this topic. If you panelists had to leave our audience with just one takeaway, one major takeaway from your perspective from our chat on using Agile in your personal lives, what would that be? One final thought to leave them with. Can be advice too.
Don't be afraid to experiment with it. You never know where you're going to achieve a breakthrough.
Yeah, and don't seek perfection in that experimentation, and in trying things out. Just be open to it.
Pam, over to you.
I think being really intentional and visual, I think awareness itself is curative, and it makes us focus on the things that matter. So being really visible about everything that you do and open, and just not trying to plan too far in advance. So having that last responsible moment. I like that phrase in Agile. So what is the last responsible moment to make a decision? So don't think you've got to do everything today.
And if I want to contribute one as well, coming from Melissa today, don't get too attached to the outcomes, which I think resonated really well with the audience as well. So I really want to thank Pam, Melissa, and Pedro for joining us today. I think this was a really nice first foray into LinkedIn Live, and I know that we'll do it again, probably covering a different topic. And I see that this one resonated with a lot of people, because when you're exposed to Agile in a professional context, usually that's the first sort of step that you take. There's no telling when there's going to be spillover into your personal life. Is it when you start to plan a wedding, when you start to move across the world, when you want to decide how to prioritize with your partner? There's so many ways to apply this mindset and this methodology and its practices. So I really thank you for all your stories and sharing them with a wider group on LinkedIn. Thanks for all our attendees as well for chiming in.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Monica. Thanks, everybody.